Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages. My name is Karey Carbaugh, and this is the Karey Carbaugh Podcast, a special Father's Day edition. For my Spanish-speaking friends, buenas noches, damas y caballeros, chicos y chicas, niños de todas edades. Yo soy Karey Carbaugh y este es el Karey Carbaugh Podcast. Bienvenido. Este es una edición especial para los padres, para el Día de los Padres. So again, welcome to the Karey Carbaugh Podcast, this special edition. I'm kind of jumping on here at a random time. I had intended on getting on sooner and got a call from a friend of mine that lives in England. And so with the time difference, it made sense to talk to her earlier in the afternoon. So I'm a little later jumping on here than I had planned on, but here we are. I wanted to jump on and do a special honoring of all the fathers out there, and especially my father. We'll get into that here in a minute. But I do want to wish you all the men that are following this, a very special and blessed Happy Father's Day. Whether you have children of your own, whether you don't have children of your own, but had a relationship with your father, or whether maybe like me, you've helped raise other people's children because you weren't blessed to have children of your own. I've worked with a number of different youth groups over the years, and although many of them, probably most of them, had very good relationships with their fathers, I've always kind of looked at a lot of those kids as my kids, many of whom now are not kids anymore. And every once in a while, one of them will reach out to me. I had one reach out to me this morning, wanting to possibly meet up and catch up. Those are always special times for me. Since I don't have kids of my own, it's always special to me to have an opportunity to reconnect with some of those kids. And so again, happy Father's Day to all of the fathers out there listening to this. Whether you're listening live or on the replay, I hope you're enjoying a great Father's Day, however you might be celebrating. If you could let me know in the comments whether you're watching this live or on the replay, either drop the word live or an L or replay or an R in the comments. That's always helpful for me to know who's catching these live and who's catching them on the replay later. I may try to respond to comments. We'll jump on here toward the end and see if we have any comments from anybody joining us live. If you're getting value from any of this, I'd appreciate you letting me know by dropping the word value or a V in the comments. If I don't get a chance to respond live, sometimes these go a little bit long and I don't have time at the end. But if I don't, I will jump on tonight and respond to your comments. I always appreciate reading those. As we go through some of this, if you could let me know maybe some special things you remember about your father or things you've learned from your father. That's some of what I'm going to focus on tonight. I'm going to cover 5 or 6, depending on how you count them. I'm counting them as 5 characteristics of my dad, some of which I've learned from and adopted of my own, some of which I've learned from, maybe should have adopted a little more than I have, but nevertheless, there are things that he modeled for me, and I'll explain some of those as we go through them. But just to give you a heads up, there's 5 of them, and so without further ado, let's jump into those here. I could have probably, in fact, I know I could have selected a lot more than that, but I didn't want this to be a super long podcast. So if you'll pardon me as I'm looking down here at my notes on my phone and not looking at the camera, I'm working on a better way to be able to do this in the future. But as most of you know, if you've been following the podcast, I am visually impaired. And so I have to look down closely at my phone to see the notes that are on my phone. And we'll get into some of that as I talk about some of the characteristics of my father. The first one I wanted to cover, and it explains, because I didn't really do this with the Mother's Day podcast that I did, but after I started doing this, it seemed very appropriate, and so I added the first characteristic here. My dad was a very, very organized person, and that showed up in a few different ways. When I bought the house from my parents, when they moved up to the mountains where they retired, my dad handed me a handwritten paper spreadsheet, which I still have, with all of the utility bills that he had kept and had written down since they bought this house in 1967, and I bought the house from them in 2000. And so roughly, what would that be? 33 years of utility bills that he had kept track of on a spreadsheet. And that was pretty typical of my dad. We found, as my 3 other siblings could attest, we found a lot of things when we were going through stuff after my mom passed away that he had kept and were very organized. He had all of his tools quite organized, all of his nuts and bolts and other things in his shop were very, very organized. He had drawers and labels, and everything had a place. That's one of the things that I mentioned earlier. I learned some things from Dad and some things I maybe didn't learn so well from him. That's one of the things I didn't learn as well. I could have learned better. I'm not all that organized. Perhaps because he was so organized and I didn't have to be growing up. I don't know. But confession time here. That's one of the things I'm not as good as he was at. It also showed up in his punctuality. And I could have made this a second characteristic, but I kind of lumped these two together. His punctuality, if you were on time, you were late in his eyes. Early is on time is late, and late is not acceptable. That one I struggle with a bit at times, but because I have to take buses, that's one that I've had to adhere to for the most part in order to not miss buses. So that was a good characteristic that he modeled that I was able to learn from. Because if you're 5 minutes late for a bus, that could mean an hour. And so you would be an hour late to your appointment if you were 5 minutes late getting to a bus. So that's certainly a good characteristic that I've tried to model from him. The second characteristic that I wanted to jump into, let me just make sure I get all of these and don't skip one. As I've mentioned before, both of my parents, and it's hard to talk about one without talking about the other because they had a strong relationship, my mom and my dad. I was blessed, as I mentioned on the Mother's Day podcast, I was blessed to grow up with both biological parents, and that's a rarity in today's society. But Dad, as I mentioned, was a very strong advocate for me and for things that he believed in. I would not be where I was today. I know I mentioned this on the Mother's Day podcast about my mom, and it's certainly equally as true with Dad. I would not be where I am today if they hadn't advocated for my rights in schools and advocated for me to live at home rather than going to the state school and being institutionalized. I remember my father sharing with me later in life that his response to that when they were told to send me to the state school was basically over my dead body. He was not going to send his 4-year-old to live in an institution. And so he was a very strong advocate for me in particular. But I saw this in other areas of his life where if people were being treated wrongly, he was an advocate on their behalf. Not always in a visible way, but he did advocate for the people that he was closest to. Which brings me to my next one. And these are not necessarily in any kind of order. The next one, number 3, Dad was a man of his word. If he said he was going to do something, by golly, he did it. And even if it meant some sacrifices on his part, or having to do things a different way, maybe, he always, if he said something, you could count on it. You could count on him following through to the best of his ability. And as I was preparing for this, one of the things I remembered that illustrates this, and one of the reasons I wanted to put this in here, is I remember when I was going through the process of closing on the house that I purchased from them. We had talked about it several years before we actually signed the contract and the purchase went through. The price of housing had gone up in those couple of years, and Dad and I had agreed on a price that would get him what he needed out of it in order to purchase the house that they were building in the mountains. But I remember having a conversation with him before we actually closed, where I said to him, you know, this house is worth quite a bit more than what we agreed to. And I said, if you would like to renegotiate the price, I'm okay with that, because I want to be fair to you all, to you and Mom, and not, you know, we had agreed that, he said if he could have given me the house, he would have, but they needed a certain amount out of this in order to build in the mountains. And I remember my dad's response to my offer to renegotiate. He said, no. He said, we had a deal. We agreed to a price, and you had my word on it, and I had your word that you were going to follow through on the purchase. And to him, that was as good as a signed contract. He was a man of his word. If he gave his word, he would stick to it. And that certainly illustrated the point, because he was not going to renegotiate. We'd agreed on a price, and we were able to do it in the timing that they needed to do it, which was a few years after we'd agreed to the price. And so he stuck to it because we had a word. We had an agreement. It was almost like we'd had a handshake. And a handshake or a man's word to him was as good as a signed contract. That's just the way he was. Which brings me to my next one. I've lost track of the numbers. I think we're on number 4 here. My dad had a very solid work ethic. He worked hard. I remember growing up, we didn't see a lot of Dad because he was always at work, especially in the summertime. He sold fertilizer and agricultural chemicals. And so he was often out with the farmers in the summertime in the fields and would come home late. So we didn't often see a lot of him, especially during the summer. And I remember a comment or a conversation that he and I had as I was getting close to high school graduation. and I was his third son. I have a younger sister. But it hit him as I was getting close to graduation how much he had missed of his sons growing up and how much he regretted that as I, the final son, was leaving the nest, so to speak. He was always at work and didn't have the time to spend with us a lot of times that he would have wanted to. And that was one of his regrets. That was one of the few times that I saw him break down and get emotional, was when he realized that. One of the other times was when he was doing a speech for me when I was getting my Eagle Scout. He broke down in the middle of that and was unable to complete his speech. So he had a softer side to him. We often saw the harder side, but he definitely had a softer, more emotional, caring side as well, which we as family got to see more than probably others outside the family did. And that brings me to, I believe, my final point here. Yes, he loved his family. Dad was a family man. And he cared about his family. He loved my mother very deeply. They were married 49 years. They both had wanted to make it to 50 years. He just didn't quite make it. He had leukemia and passed away from leukemia about 21 years ago. But he loved his family, and he loved family time, even though he didn't get a lot of time to spend with us. When he did, it was quality time. And my sister and I think, probably got a little bit more of that as he got later into his work career. He was able to go camping more. He was able to spend more time with us, more quality time. I don't know that he had quite the level of time when my brothers were growing up, because he had me and then later my sister. He had 4 kids that he was raising. But he did love his family, and he loved family time. He loved his parents and his grandparents. I was blessed to know one of my great-grandmothers, and really one of my great-grandfathers too, although I was very young when he passed away. But Dad was close to family, and family time and holidays meant a lot to him. He was insistent when they built the house in the mountains. He wanted a table, a dining room table that all of his children and grandchildren could sit around. He didn't want tables scattered all over the house like they were in this house when we were growing up. We had the kids' table, and we had multiple adult tables, and he didn't want that. He wanted everybody around one table. And that was a part of his strong connection to family and strong love of family. As I say, I could have brought out a whole lot more characteristics of Dad. I didn't want this to go on too long. But as you celebrate your Father's Day today, I just encourage you to take time to get to know your father if he's still with us on this earth. Take time to get to know him. Take time to get to know his stories. I was blessed. I didn't really feel like a blessing at the time when I was laid off from a large corporation a couple of years before my dad passed away. That gave me the opportunity to spend some quality time with Dad. He would come down from the mountains and go to his doctor's appointments. Because I wasn't working, I was unemployed for almost 5 years, 2 or 3 of those while he was still alive. I had the opportunity which I consider a blessing, to go to lunch with him, to spend time with him. Some of it was one-on-one time, some of it was him and Mom and me, but we had the quality time together, and I got to hear some of his stories, some of his life lessons, life challenges, just life story in general. So I encourage you, if you have that relationship with your father, or if you've been distant from him and can build that relationship, I encourage you to take time to do that before that time is gone, because their story is a part of your history. And you may not feel it now, but at some point you will cherish that time as I do, and you will cherish those lessons learned from, in particular, your father, since we're focused on Father's Day today. And I do recognize and realize that some people out there don't have a positive relationship with their father. I was very blessed. But I know that some people out there maybe didn't have a father who was present in their life. That's very common in today's society, where the men will leave the families. And children don't always know their father. Even as adults, they don't always know who their father was, or they don't always have a relationship. And I also recognize that sometimes the relationships that some of you have with your father may not be positive. Unfortunately, fathers are human, and they make mistakes, some of which they never admit to. I know that there's abuse involved, there's other neglect, other things that contribute to a negative relationship with fathers. I want to acknowledge that and recognize that. And if you're in that situation, I want to encourage you that, I know this sounds cliche, but it's true. If you don't have a relationship with your father, or if your father has moved on like mine has, we all have a heavenly Father. And I know all of my followers and people watching this may not be believers. Whatever that looks like to you, whether it's a spiritual connection with something bigger than you are, than we as humans are, that is in effect a heavenly Father, or a father figure that can maybe be to you what your father may not have been to you. And so I just want to offer that up as encouragement to those for whom today might be a difficult day, because I know Father's Day isn't a pleasant experience for everyone. It's harder for me now that my dad's gone. As time passes, it just becomes another day. But I did want to jump on here and acknowledge and recognize the fathers among us. I hope you have gotten value from this podcast. If you have, let me know that in the comments. I'll take a couple minutes here to just see if we have any comments to respond to. And if we do, I'll try to respond to those live if I can pull them up here. Thought I had my Facebook all ready to go. There we go. Let's see if we have any live comments here. Looks like we have a couple. So I need to turn this sound down so we don't get an echo. Again, I apologize that I can't look at the screen and look at my phone at the same time. Miguel, my brother from Mexico that is so faithful in watching these. Muchas gracias, Miguel. Y feliz Día de Padres a ti también. He said Happy Father's Day. And so I wanted to say Happy Father's Day back to him in Spanish. Muchas gracias para ver estos videos. Thank you for watching these videos. And Sonia, shout out to Sonia. Appreciate you being with us this afternoon, Sonia, and watching this live. I think I skipped one here. I'm not necessarily catching these in order. Um, yes, indeed, Sonia, I was blessed to have uh, a strong relationship with my father and strong parents as I was growing up. Um, I could not have done much of what I have done without their advocacy. And as I say, it's hard to separate one from the other. But I appreciate you commenting back on that, and that is so true. Looks like those are the only 3 comments we have so far. I hope I'll have some other people jump on here on the replay. But I think I've taken enough of your time on a Sunday afternoon, so I will let you go. I'm going to be jumping on Wednesday night for my usual time for the Karey Carbaugh podcast. This week I will be helping with a vacation Bible school at church, so if I'm a little frazzled by Wednesday night when I jump on here, you'll know why. But I'm looking forward to being with you all again Wednesday night. And so until then, I do thank you sincerely for joining me. If you'd like to be added to my email list, drop the word email in the comments or shoot me a direct message with your email address, and I'd be glad to add you to my email list so that I can notify you of special events that I'm working on bringing to you to a smaller private group very soon. So let me know that in the comments, or if you'd like to schedule a personal time to discuss some of what I've covered on these podcasts in more detail, let me know that as well, and I'd be glad to send you a calendar link and get you on my calendar. That reminded me of something else that I meant to say, and now my brain has just escaped me. But, if you like these videos, as I've heard of a guy that I watch on some podcasts, like if you do, and share these videos out if they're meaningful to you. I know my brother Miguel has shared it on his timeline several times, and I appreciate that, Miguel. But with that, I will bid you a fond farewell and a great afternoon or evening whenever you're watching this. Again, thanks for watching, and I will catch you on Wednesday night. Until then, make it a great week. Make it a blessed week for someone around you, and do something positive for someone that you come in contact with this week. With that, have a great day, and I will see you soon. Bye-bye for now.